On today's show, early injury concerns with Alex Ovechkin. What? Already? Next on this edition of Locked On Capitals.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme. I've covered the Capitals for the past 3 seasons for Locked On and various other outlets before that. I'm also the host of the weekly show called The Capitals Minutecast, available wherever you find your podcasts. And as always, I want to thank you for making this your first listen of the day. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, camp started today and already early chemistry. Yes, we already saw chemistry between Leonard and Pierre-Luc Dubois. Is that the makings of a second line already? I'll talk about that a bit later. We'll talk about the return of Sonny Milano and also Martin Fehervary and Justin Sourdif in non-contact jerseys. What's behind that? And then storylines to follow surrounding camp. But just to get it going here, the big news this afternoon is that Alex Ovechkin left the ice early, being evaluated for a lower body injury. And that's what we'll dive into right here, the big news, and ultimately not what you want to hear surrounding the Capitals. Day one of camp, Alex Ovechkin heading into his 21st season in the league and already injury concerns. Let's get right into it, talking about the man himself, Alex Ovechkin. And like I said, the one thing that no one wanted to hear, the captain didn't finish the first practice of camp. And the word from the team was that it was a lower body injury and that he was being evaluated. And already concerned, right, that he is a key piece of the Capitals offense. He is the captain of this team. So the fear that surrounded the Capitals right out of the gate was the Caps are going to start the 25-26 season minus their captain. Now, before we start panicking here, it's worth pointing out it's day one of camp. The team is stressing precautionary. And I'll add this as well. Ovi didn't do the skate test this morning either, which, if you followed the camp over the years, isn't anything too strange for some of the veterans on the team, especially guys like Alex Ovechkin, which we found out actually had his skate test done before the start of the camp. But when he left the ice, there was kind of a gasp surrounding the camp, like, what's going on here? That we're just formally kicking everything off here and Ovi's leaving the ice. And, the concern is real. He's 40 years old now. He's coming off a season that he faced a substantial injury last year against the Utah Hockey Club. Jack McBain, fractured leg. And all things considered, that wasn't as bad as it first appeared. But, a guy that was pretty bulletproof, the Russian machine that never breaks, that was the first major injury that he faced in quite some time. But, rewinding time back then, he still came back, still scored goals, still caught and passed Wayne Gretzky. But it was the first long-term injury we'd seen from him in years. And the feeling today, early in the afternoon, was here we go again. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's major. Nobody's saying that this is a setback, but we also don't want to see the franchise icon limping off the ice, especially when he's just 3 goals shy of 900. Yes, at this point, it's all gravy, as he already is the greatest goal scorer of all time and 9 games away from 1,500. He continues to do great things and on the verge of great things as well. And a bit of an update here. As I was hitting the record button, there was a statement released by the Capitals from Spencer Carberry that he did, in fact, leave the ice, yes, but it was simply precautionary, day-to-day, not too concerning. We remember last year that he missed some time as well because the Capitals said he was nicked up from off-season activity. So a collective sigh of relief by us Capitals fans that he is going to be okay. Spencer Carberry said as much. It was just precautionary. Underline that one and tell your friends, because I know that there's already been quite an upheaval online. And, going into this season, that's the big thing. We do need to see Alex Ovechkin 100% heading into this season. Again, this could be his last season. He hasn't formally come out and said that, a matter of fact, yes, this is my final season. If you are an everydayer of the show, it is my belief that it is his final season. He just doesn't want that storyline kind of clouding the Capitals 25-26 season. Like, if this is your last season, what does it feel like? He is solely concentrated on the Capitals, making it to the playoffs, the Stanley Cup, that kind of thing. So big picture, sigh relief, Alex Ovechkin is okay. That's the big thing. And early chemistry is what we're seeing at camp. And often times I kind of, throw around ideas like who is going to fit here and who's going to fit there. And as it turns out, it does appear, this is the first day of camp, so read into it what you will, but Pierre-Luc Dubois centering Ryan Leonard and Alexei Protas. And that's somewhat one of the things that I had talked about this offseason is Pierre-Luc Dubois, Ryan Leonard, and Andrew Crystal. But seeing Dubois, Leonard, and Alexei Protas is also quite intriguing. I will say that is a huge line, right? Every guy on that line is massive. Dubois, Leonard, and Alexei Protas, that if that actually ever came to fruition and we saw that in a real game time situation, that would be something. And Leonard, the rookie skating next to Dubois on day one, that's not an accident. That's a statement. And like I said, day one. So I'm not going to get too far into the weeds of that other than to say they're getting a look at it and seeing how it works. Because the team clearly wants to see how Leonard looks with NHL skill around him. That we know he knocked it out of the park at Boston College on, the international stage, that kind of thing. But we want to see how he's going to progress, not in the latter part of the season, not getting inserted into the lineup in the playoffs, but with a full camp, a full season, being surrounded with great NHL talent. How does he fare? And Dubois, being that big body down the middle, can really open things up. Protas, we know, has been growing into his game the last couple of years. In particular, last season, Protas grew big time, scored more goals last year than he has in his entire career. So you put that group together and that could be something. Again, it's just day one, but that is the early observations. And as the camp progresses, we're going to see different tinkering here and there. So today it was Leonard, it was Dubois and Protas, but at some point, we might see a Crystal added to that mix just to get some different looks. And then try some of those different looks out at camp, or in the preseason games to see how they fare. And I think that is how the Capitals will construct their lines. As we know, the first line, I don't see that changing a whole lot. The second line could change, right? If Connor McMichael goes to that third line center. So it's going to be interesting to see how this all shakes out, but exciting. A little bit of drama in day one of camp with Alex Ovechkin leaving the ice early, but all things considered, an exciting first day of camp, some good chemistry, some hijinks between Duhaime, Tom Wilson, and even Braden Holtby. Quite an event to attend, that is for sure. All right, so coming up here after the break, we will talk about camp updates. Sonny Milano out on the ice, and question marks, concerns perhaps for Capitals fans as Martin Fehervary and Justin Sordoff in non-contact jersey. What's the latest? I'll discuss straight ahead. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love using FanDuel because it fits however you like to bet. Player props, building a same-game parlay, or even jumping in live action as it unfolds. It makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. So if the Commanders are playing, or maybe you're a Ravens fan, that's already exciting. But if you want all the games to be that much more exciting, open up the FanDuel app, put a little bit of money on the game. All of a sudden, they got that much more exciting. It's quick, it's easy, and the best way to add a little bit more energy to Sundays if you need it already. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So in segment 2 here, talking Sonny Milano, a guy that played, 3 games all of last year, had a bit of an ambiguous injury that he was edging closer to return in March, but then there was a setback. And at the end of the day, we still don't know what was wrong with Sonny Milano. What we do know is Sonny Milano, a lot like Hendrik Slop here, that this is their year to bring it, or, well, it might be over with their time with the Capitals. But Sonny Milano, before I go down to any what could go wrong, let's talk about what's going right. And Sonny Milano looks like he fits in, looks like he's in great shape, and a confidence builder surrounding this team. That you have a guy that was at one time a pretty big contributor, looks like he is full go. So let's dive into that in the second segment of today's show, because he was, Sonny Milano, a full participant, and honestly, great news. And I've changed my opinion on that a little bit, and I've done that just in regards that, I've thought about it, about the young talent, and what if the young talent isn't 100%, or say, one or two of them isn't, that you're going to need a guy like Sonny Milano, who has NHL experience and at times has been quite a dynamic player to step up. And, you remember he missed the end of last season and the lion's share of last season. And the Capitals, missed his speed, his nose for the puck, his playmaking ability, the ability to transition the puck, move it through the neutral zone. And, just kind of stir things up offensively. They missed Sonny Milano. And when I look at some of my earlier notes when he first came to the team, that's one of the notes I put down, was has a good nose for the puck. When he's dialed in and 100% healthy, he is quite a player. He's one of those, shall we say, middle six guys who doesn't always get the headlines, but has, a decent amount of miles on his hockey odometer in the NHL, and that is valuable in and of itself. But when he's out, you notice it. And the Capitals definitely could have used his depth last season at different points throughout the season. And it was a bit difficult. And I kind of, guessed, I kind of, went into the conspiratorial waters, is that it was at roster management, that where was Sonny Milano going to fit? I think that this season, he is going to have a spot, whether he's, on the ice night in and night out, or if he's going to be an extra. I think that might be the case, but I have a sneaky hunch that he might, again, day one of camp here, really early, he might make the team. I'm not saying he's going to be on the ice night in and night out. He might be an extra, like I said, but he has looked good thus far. So seeing him back, full contact, skating freely, is an encouraging sign for the Capitals. That's the good news to start this segment. Now, an area of concern is Martin Fehervary, that we were told, by Chris Patrick and different guys, that he is going to be 100% start camp in the fall. And what do we know? They're not doctors. They don't know how these things are going to progress. And one of the things we know about Martin Fehervary is he has still been dealing with some inflammation. Is he going to be good to go in day one of the regular season? It's too early to say, but as I record this right now, non-contact jersey, the same goes for Justin Sordiff, which was even a bit more of a head scratcher, as I already kind of knew that Martin Fehervary was dealing with, like I said, that inflammation. The Justin Sordiff news caught me a bit by surprise. But from what we're being told, it's precautionary. That's the common theme here. Fehervary, of course, is slotted to be a big piece on the back end, is a big piece. And the Capitals sorely missed him in the playoffs last year when he was out of the lineup. He's likely paired up with, probably Matt Roy to give the Capitals a shutdown look. So, you want him 100% when the game starts. Is he going to be 100%? We don't know. It's being said that it's precautionary. I think that, people like to read into things, really early. Like I said, it's day one of camp. If camp is getting ready to wrap up and we're talking about preseason games and these guys are still in non-contact jerseys, then I guess it would be a little bit more worrisome. But then Justin sort of, like I said, that was a bit, one that caught me a little bit more by surprise, as I did not know he was dealing with any kind of injury. And the thing that we know about Sortif is that, he's not a lock, to have a spot on the roster. I mean, Chris Patrick said he will be playing in the NHL. However, it's all about him and how he'll play. What we have seen in the informal skates before today, he looked good. But, what are we going to see from the younger guys, the tertiary guys that are fighting for roles? I'm talking Frank, LaPierre, these kind of guys that even though you've been told that you're going to be in the NHL, you've still got to bring it. So he's going to be fighting for a job as well. Not guaranteed anything. He's one of those young guys trying to show coaches he belongs. And a really early take, I do think he'll make the team. I know, that don't phone the press. That's nothing too surprising. But I think he'll make the team, fourth line, of course, but not limited to that. As we know, he can play at the wing position or the center. But when you're non-contact jerseys, you're not doing yourself any favors, and it slows down your momentum, of course. But, it is, some of these players, they need to take it easy. I don't want Martin Fehervary to get, out on the ice, practicing earlier than he should to exacerbate that injury, that if he would have just taken a bit more time, maybe it could have healed the right way. So even if he misses, and I hate to say this, even if he misses a couple games to start the season, but he's 100% after that, I would be in favor of that than rushing him out there. Hockey season's a long season, and then have him out for a lengthy period of time. So again, it's precautionary and just understand the system. So it's interesting. And something I mentioned here earlier, Dubois, Leonard, and Protas, you don't just throw a rookie on a line like that unless you're serious about giving him a look. So it's interesting. The different lines that we have seen out there so far, the battles out there, and just seeing how all of this sticks. So you're seeing the integration of players and chemistry. You're dealing with injuries, players that are off the shelf, making their way back onto the ice there. But all things considered, I think the Capitals are in a pretty good position in day one of camp. That it's all going to be about the guys that are going to have to prove their worth. Like I said, Sonny Milano's there. He's not going to have any give-me's. Neither is Sortif. Neither is any of these guys. But, a Capitals team with, fairly healthy, all things considered, as I talked about in the first segment, Alex Ovechkin was mostly precautionary. That's a good thing. And then just hope that Milano can rise up and the guys like Fehervary and Sortif are good to go as soon as possible. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about storylines to watch surrounding this team. An intriguing camp, an intriguing start to the season here, as there are players entering into contract years. There's young prospects looking for bigger roles. I'll break down the biggest stories surrounding the Capitals straight ahead. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube and comment anything down below. So in the final segment of today's show, we're talking about players that we need to see more of and players that need to seize the day. There are holes in the lineup and more candidates than there are holes in the lineup. So we want the best players possible to fill that void. And number one is Connor McMichael. Quite a buzz this offseason. Is he going to be the guy to fill the hole at that third line center position? What we heard is Spencer Carberry said that Connor McMichael is going to have the first kick at the can, if you will, at the third line center position and see how he progresses. However, the good thing about Connor is he allows the Capitals some flexibility. We know that he was amazing on that second line left wing, but what I want from him is to be that guy to stabilize the third line center. He can play wing. His native position is the center position, and we need a guy to anchor that third line center position down. So that's the question. Does he stick at the third line center? We're going to get some looks at camp and some preseason games, probably sprinkle in a little bit of LaPierre and different kind of players and see which candidate is the best. But that's a spot they want Connor McMichael in. He's proven he can handle wing. He's proven that he belongs in the NHL. And that was a bit of a change for Connor McMichael, as he was a guy earlier in his career that kind of bounced around a little bit, kind of like Hendrix Lapierre would get some opportunities on the Capitals, and then you would see his production wane a little bit, and he'd go down to Hershey. Last season, he made the Capitals team his own, his forever home. So that's assuring. And guess what happened? Put up big numbers. And a lot of that, of course, was playing on that second line with Pierre-Luc Dubois that had seen such great success. But can he drive a line as a center? That's a big question. And who ultimately surrounds him, as the third line doesn't rise and fall with Connor McMichael, if in fact he is the third line center. So if Spencer Carberry can surround him with a great supporting cast, Leonard, Beauvillier, Miroshnichenko, something like that, that could be big. And that's a different test. If he holds that role, the third line center, the team's depth looks a lot better. That, Chris Patrick's not going to have to go out there and start calling people up, looking for that third line center like we did last year for Lars Eller, that can be another thing to cross off the list. However, if it's not, then Carberry's going to have to shuffle some things around. See Hendrix Lapierre. Again, think that bridge deal. They signed him to a prove-it contract that, for some reason say he's not capable. Then you can try Lapierre. Like I also said earlier in the show, Justin Sordiff can play center as well. I don't think that's really where they have him penciled in, but he may get some looks at center as well. And we've seen how moving things around can mess with chemistry. So I think the Capitals will need to handle this tactfully, that there was chemistry, obviously, with the second line last year, as McMichael and Pierre-Luc Dubois and either Protas or Wilson worked really well together. So, on the other hand, sometimes you don't want to mess with things too much. Now, number two, which youngsters make the roster? We've talked about Leonard in this episode. We've talked about Sordiff, Hendrix in the mix too. And don't forget about the guys from Hershey who are hungry as well. That there are guys that are going to be vying for roles, younger players on this team that, and sometimes they're surprise players, right? When you think Alexei Protas was in a camp, his first camp, that he impressed. And I'm like, wow, the feeling was he's going to, be in the camp and then get sent down to Hershey. He played so well. And the Caps are in an interesting spot here. It is going to be a mix from that veteran successful core. I'm talking about Ovechkin, Carlson, Wilson, these kind of guys, but also the integration and the youth that's knocking at the door. And the team needs to figure out who's ready and who's not. And also the big questions, like I said earlier, players that are entering into contract years. John Carlson, he made some comments today as well that he said that he's, and I'm paraphrasing, I'm not saying I'm retiring at the end of this next season, but I am also going to tell you I'm not playing another 10 years. So it is an interesting position for the Capitals. They're both non-committal. John Carlson non-committal on the Caps, and Chris Patrick and the Capitals non-committal on John Carlson. That is this team going to lean into the youth, the future, or do they want to keep John Carlson around on a short-term deal to kind of be a mentor for some of the younger players? That is one of the biggest sneaky storylines that not everyone's thinking about, is John Carlson. And it's something that really should be thought about quite a bit, as he is a minute monster. And when he's out there, he plays quality minutes. So as I record this, heading into this season, still no extension. Of course, he said he's not worried. He's not distracted. He just wants to play. And I guess that's the thing that I have observed about John Carlson from afar, is he seems pretty even-keeled, doesn't seem to get too riled up. I mean, you'll see him shove people around a little bit from time to time, but all things considered, he seems like he, like I said, is pretty even-keel. But that is a situation that I think the Capitals need to take care of. And it'll be interesting to see what comes of that, because it's my belief that, and sometimes just bringing it up, people like, I can't believe you're even talking about this. But if the Capitals don't have bigger plans for John Carlson beyond this year, then they would be better off trading him and getting something in return. Because if they just let him go until the end of, this coming season, and he goes, into the summer, he could walk and the Capitals get nothing. And that's worrisome to me as well, because I would rather get something, and John Carlson is going to fetch a return. That much I know for sure. But then the hard part of it as well is, at what point do they make that decision? If it goes all the way out to the trade deadline, you're not going to get as big of a return, because the window under his current contract, unless his next team signs him to an extension, will help the team in their pursuit that year. But then they're going to have to re-up him. So it's an interesting walk for the Capitals to take. It's my belief that Chris Patrick, the decision makers, Brian McClellan still involved in there. When I saw them in Minnesota, they both still go to the games. They still sit in the same suite together. They're still really involved. That they need to get together and decide, what are we doing about John Carlson, number 74? A workhorse, has been lights out for the Capitals for years. Are we keeping him or not? And as Capitals fans, oftentimes it's easy to just let your emotions just, give him the checkbook, let him fill it out. He's so great. Capitals still have to stay under budget. They still have to plan for the long term, and Alex Ovechkin says, I do want to come back for another year or two. How much is that going to cost? That you hate to make it about money, but it is. Trevor Van Riemsdyk as well. Maybe not as big of an impact than the two players I mentioned before that, but also another player that's entering into a contract year. So the Capitals are in an interesting position. It is, in a lot of ways, a changing of the guard. That it was for years. That it was, like I said, Ovechkin, Backstrom, Oshie, these kind of guys. But those players are getting older and slowly peeling away. At some point, we're going to add John Carlson to that mix, and the Capitals have got to be ready to usher in the next wave of young talent. So to say this camp is of little importance would be an understatement. It is of tremendous importance. That we're going to see how especially if you want to talk about defenders, how are some of the young defenders? Where are they at in their development? I'm talking Chesley, these kind of guys. Vincent Diorio, different prospects in the Capitals' defensive prospect pool there, right? And then I think that they can assess, do they need a Carlson, or is the perception that they have someone, whether it's playing in juniors or, in Hershey, that seems like they're just ready to take it to the next level. I have no concerns. I know John Carlson is going to knock it out of the park as long as he's healthy. And generally speaking, he is 9 times out of 10, except when he takes a puck off the head, and that wasn't his fault. That he is going to be good to go, but still something I think the Capitals should take care of sooner than later. So if in fact there is no big plans, that the Capitals get something in return. So excitement surrounding the Capitals in day one. Just to recap here, Alex Ovechkin leaving the ice early, as it turns out, precautionary. Early chemistry out there we saw with Ryan Leonard and Pierre-Luc Dubois. Camp updates, Sonny Milano, Fehervary and sort of non-contact concerns, and storylines surrounding the Capitals. Can Connor McMichael solidify the third-line center position? And what is the long-term plans with number 74, John Carlson? All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily year-round podcast covering the Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. You are what makes this show successful. When you're done here, head on over to Locked On NHL, as they have you covered 5 days a week, available wherever you find your podcasts and on YouTube. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.